Right, so welcome to today's edition of this workshop on step 10 and 11 and whatever else we get to. Could we please have a moment's silence to gather our thoughts? Okay, so I'm going to start with some questions from last time, or from the intervening period. And the first question is a very good one. It's essentially about the fact that there are 3 steps which contain instructions on inventory, 4, 10 and 11, but only 2 steps which actually mention inventory in the headline. So I'm just going to shift to the big book, and first of all we're going to look at page 59. And page 59, when it appears on your screen, for those of you who are listening, I'll read everything out, don't worry. It says, step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And then later down the same page it says, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. And then just to remind ourselves, step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Now, the problem here, as we've said before, is if you have a recipe book with a title page, the title of the recipe will not tell you how to make whatever the item is. You need the instructions. So what we've got in terms of actual instructions in the book, which is the real substance of the step as it's presented on page 59 is simply the headline. It's not the whole thing. You've got 3 sets of instructions. The first set of instructions is the set of step 4 instructions. And they run, as we know, from the bottom of page 63 to the end of page 71. Which, if you're good at maths, you'll realise is 8 pages. That's 8 pages of instructions on how to do inventory. That's not simple. It's not quick. You're not going to do it between now and lunchtime. That's something that one does very infrequently when one's whole life needs a review. When you want to stand back from the whole thing and revisit every aspect of your life and be completely thorough and systematic, we've got the step 4 instructions. Then we've got the daily instructions, and the first set of instructions there we covered last week, which is the nightly review on page 86, which is a meditation. So I'll just flip to that and remind people what that's about, also in case people weren't here last week. Ooh, I need to actually share the screen rather than just flip to it. There we go. So the questions which begin, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Now this covers lots of the same territory as a step 4, but it's a sort of 10-15 minute meditation max, maybe 5 minutes. It's no more than that. It's not a full step 4. And some people do a step 4 every day, or at least they have a go. They do half an hour to an hour of writing every evening, and if that works for you, then I'm very pleased for you. Then finally, we've got the spot check inventory on page 86, where it says 84 rather. We continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. So it's spot, remove, spot, remove, spot, remove. So those are the 3 levels. And how I operate those in my life is you start with the simplest one first. You spot it and ask for it to be removed. For stuff that sticks during the day, you've got, at the end of the day, you've got the opportunity to look at those questions more closely in the Step 11 review on page 86. If something really won't shift, so after 3 days, after 4 days, you're still incandescent with rage or quivering with fear or whatever it is, then you can dip back into the step 4 instructions. Maybe you'll do a resentment inventory. Maybe you'll look at the page 67 questions on what were my mistakes, where was I frightened, where was I selfish, where was I self-seeking. Maybe you'll do the fear inventory on page 68. Maybe you'll do the conduct inventory on page 69. But you've got a range of options available to troubleshoot a particular problem where you need more genuine analysis and clarity. And then if your whole life falls apart, then you do another step 4. Because clearly there's a systematic problem. And I think it's important and helpful to apply the principle of tradition 9, which is to be no more organised than is strictly necessary, to not apply any more complexity than is strictly necessary. I've known a few people in Al-Anon and S-Anon over the years, and occasionally I've spotted a habit, which I'm sometimes guilty of being a little bit too organised, of having complex systems to solve very simple problems, because spontaneity makes me twitchy. And there is therefore the temptation, if you're a good Al-Anon, to want to apply formulaic systems to solving problems, and doing endless self-searching and endless inventory. And of course one can go to the other extreme and do none at all, but I think a balance must be sought. And AAs rarely need to do more rarely need to be held back with inventory. You normally need to encourage people to look at themselves. With the Al-Anons, it can go to the other extreme. So you've got to know which side of the fence you're on. Right, so that was the first question. Does anyone have any questions about that? Just feel free to unmask yourself, unshield yourself, unmute yourself, that's the word, and just pop the question, or you can pop any questions in the chat box. If you're dialing in in the UK, then text Emma, and she can read out a question. If you're dialing in Israel, then text Sarah Rivka or Elisheva, and I'm sure they would be happy to read out your question. If you're dialing in from anywhere else, well, you'll have to work that one out yourself. So any questions so far? Okay, so the second question is about, are there times when it's better to employ a corrective measure and only sometimes an apology? And I think that's absolutely right. So there's an important principle in steps 8 and 9. If you listen to lots of AA tapes from America, now God bless America, we know that. However, nevertheless, there are some issues. Very occasionally, Americans can take things a little bit literally. Let's not go into examples, but just leave that there as an idea. And in steps 8 and 9, this can create an issue, because there is the idea, sometimes propagated, that to make an amend is always to have some grand, ostentatious conversation where you knock on the door, where, uninvited. You call someone up uninvited and declare very grandly that you now have a spiritual program, and unless you do your utmost to straighten out the past, you'll never get over your drinking, and you chug through the formula, and everybody is embarrassed, and it must be done face to face. If it's not done face to face, you've done it wrong. This is an idea which is propagated. There is the idea that sometimes people say, well, if you harmed them face to face, you must make amends face to face. You only make amends in a letter if you harmed them in a letter. And that doesn't strike me as a very principled or thought through way of looking at this. It's a view. I think my experience is that the job of steps 8 and 9 is to repair the damage, and that's what making amends really means. It's undoing the harm if possible, repairing the damage, setting forth on a new foundation and building something new. And it gives you all sorts of different tools in step 9. There is the overt knock on the door, declare your presence, declare your intention, apologise, say what can you do to make it right. There's paying things back. There's frankly analysing the past on page 83. I mean, you have to be careful with that one as well. But it talks about there being a long period of reconstruction ahead on page 83. So I think when I've done something wrong, there are various tools of the programme available to make amends. The first one is the full grand step 9 amend, the traditional step 9 amend with the script. The second one is a very simple apology. The third one is an expression of gratitude. Often the worst thing that a person can do is to accept help, guidance or assistance in some way and never say thank you. That leaves that's a debt which is unpaid. Fourth one, you can pay back the debt. Fifth one, you can change your behaviour going forward, because often it's only when the behaviour is changed that the person starts to trust you again. And it also talks in the book about attacking problems on the flank rather than risking a face-to-face confrontation. And if in a relationship the harm is you've undermined someone's confidence, simply saying sorry for that will do nothing. One's got to help boost the person's confidence. And often that has to be done carefully and subtly and with tact and over a long period of time, because a simple mumbled apology won't do. So I think steps 8 and 9, they often do require, if I've done something rotten and there's a threshold above which something requires an apology, and then there's a threshold above that where it requires a much more extensive amend process, where I'm admitting all of the behaviour, I'm standing back from the whole relationship, I'm saying, look, what can I do differently in future? But below, right at the bottom, is just the general rough and tumble of getting things wrong on a daily basis. And I don't know if you've ever met one of those disconcerting people in recovery that's always going around making amends to everyone. And they're the only person who is. And there's this terrible implication that everybody else is getting it wrong. And they're so righteous, they're constantly making amends. If only everybody else would make amends as regularly as they do, then we wouldn't be in such a pickle. That's the implication of that. One's got to, I think, observe the custom around you. So there is obviously a degree of rough and tumble where people repair the harm through simply being sober, considerate and helpful regardless of what anyone says or does. It's page 98 to 99. Patient, tolerant, kind and loving. Practising those virtues, in my experience, is how a lot of the harm is actually undone. But if a conversation needs to be had, it needs to be had. If it's an apology, apologise. If it's an expression of gratitude, say thank you. If it's an amend, make amends. Couple of questions from one person. Are we still following through pages of the big book? Well, in as far as we have at all. It's taken a long time to go about 2.5 pages. So in principle, yes, and we're in principle going to be on the bottom of page 86 from a couple of minutes' time. Question, where is the steps 8 and 9? Pages 76 to 83. The book is a little bit unclear on step 1, but you get to the end of step 1 and it says on page 44 we're now at step 2, which implies everything before 44 is step 1. And it gets a bit clearer after that. It signals which step it's about to discuss. And so practically what to do on a daily basis as part of the nightly review. We've covered that last week. I don't want to the tapes should be available, or they are available. So I would go and listen back to that. I want to cover the morning business now. So I'm just flipping to the screen again. And we're at the bottom of page 86. Now, the step 11 in the morning is pages 86 to 88, and there are a few instructions, and the instructions are interleaved with various pieces of commentary. So on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Right, so, now on awakening, I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, every morning. I get up at around 6, and between 4:30 and 6, I'm not really awake, but I'm not really asleep. I'm not properly asleep either. If you have enough prayers memorised, and I also, apart from the prayers, have chunks of the big book memorised. For instance, the step 11 nightly review. And what I'm in the habit of doing in that period from 4:30 to 6:30, if my mind runs free, it can go to very difficult, strange places. And there's no benefit in it doing that. So I tend to repeat prayers over and over to myself, or I run through the nightly review from yesterday, because I normally do the review actually in the morning rather than at night. Or I start this process when I'm still in bed, when I'm still thinking about, but before I've even got up, I start the process of running through these instructions. I think it's very important to have 86 to 88 largely memorised, or at least to have the instruction elements largely memorised in order, so that you can resort to them at any time of the day. And I have my own little system, and I've got the items numbered, and it really helps. But the first thing that I've got to do, depending on your tradition, you'll be saying a couple of prayers as soon as your eyes creak open in the morning. But at least to have somewhere up in the first few prayers of the morning, we ask God to direct our thinking. Now, unfortunately, this paragraph has got everything backwards. It says, before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. What it really should say is, on awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. Because that's what comes first. The reason it needs directing, and there's a little bit of philosophy here. The ego mind is like a badly programmed piece of software. the software is necessary to operate in the world. Let's not go into the details as to why, but it's not a satisfactory guide to life itself, which is the real content of my day. So in the morning, I've got a choice. I can either ask my ego, which is constantly chattering, to direct my day, or I can ask God to direct my day. So I'm really picking which voice am I going to listen to. And obviously I want to listen to God. And then it talks about three things, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. The language implies that I am married to self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. And to understand what those three are. So self-pity. I feel sad because I haven't got what I want. Dishonest. How can I get what I want without everybody realising I'm trying to get what I want? That's dishonest. Or self-seeking motives. I want what I want. So all three of those are simply different forms of being after what I want. And that's what the ego is about. It's about wanting things in the world, circumstances, situations, outcomes, or it's about wanting image, either my own image of me or for you to have a particular image of me, so reputation. And this is what needs to be excised every day. This is what needs to be cut off. So that I'm left with what matters, which is trying to do God's will. And under those conditions, once I've made the decision that God is going to direct my thinking, I have to trust that God will. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always going to be right. That's always going to be right, that the ideas which come to me will be God's will. We'll come to that in a moment. But the job in the morning, and this is a meditation. Meditation is concentrated thought. Certainly in the 1939 definition, this was written in 1939. It's concentrated thought. So forget notions of Buddhist practice. Buddhism is a wonderful thing. Buddhist practice is a wonderful thing. But it's not what they were instructing us to do here. They're instructing us to think along particular lines. So on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead and we consider our plans for the day. Now, the wording, I've been working with this passage for 27 years, one way or another. So, I've thought about this a few times, let me tell you. We consider our plans for the day. That could mean we derive our plans for the day and then consider them, or that we've already got plans for the day and we consider them. I found it immensely helpful when I finish the business of a day. I have a business part of the day and then I knock off for the evening, and then I'm, Liberty Hall. I have my dinner and talk to my friends and do whatever I do in the evening. At the end of the business part of the day, I usually set my plans for the next day so that I can completely relax in the evening thinking, I don't need to think about tomorrow, it's already planned out. So when I get to this in the morning, all I'm doing is reconsidering something that's already been planned, checking with the higher power, is this correct? Have I missed anything? Should I add something? Should I take something away? Is there someone I've forgotten to contact? All of those questions. In terms of, and this is an Al-Anon, S-Anon specific element. The risk I'm at with my Al-Anon side is that my plans for the day would appear to someone observing me from the outside to be a recipe for martyrdom, where I bite off far more than I can chew. I do all sorts of things for other people they should be doing for themselves. I attach excessive importance to each one of those things so that if I miss something, I run around feeling guilty and wretched because I haven't done the 10,000 things I'm supposed to do. As someone with a strong Al-Anon streak, I was talking to someone the other day and I was saying I think I'm about 40% an AA and about 60% an Al-Anon. My tendency is to overpack the day. So what I need to do is to make sure that my plans for the day include a lot of looking after myself, because I'm of no use to anyone else if I'm not in a good state myself. And to include a good dose of enjoying myself. Again, if I'm a misery, I'm of no use to other people. And something I've had to learn to do is I consider my plans for the day. I come up with a list, then I cross half of them off. Just cross them off now, because you won't do them all anyway. Cross them off now, then you don't need to feel guilty for the rest of the day. So here's another thing that I think is an Al-Anon trait. As an Al-Anon, everything is of supreme importance. I grew up in a house where I remember my father would be sent out to do the shopping. And we lived in the countryside. He'd be sent to the local town. And he'd come back with 1 pint of full-fat milk and 2 pints of semi-skimmed milk. And what my mother had wanted was 2 pints of skimmed milk and 1 pint of semi-skimmed milk. And she would go off into this squawking rage because he's too stupid and incompetent to get the right milk. Now, my father was very cheerful and he would just toddle off into the other room saying, when I was a boy, milk was milk. So he didn't care. But this was very important, according to my mother. If you care, you worry. If you don't worry, it means you don't care. That was one of the little mantras. And so when planning for the day, I think it's very important to apply the principle of how important is it anyway? Now, this is another Al-Anon aspect. I suspect a couple of you are married to men who are slightly chaotic. And so, my plan for the day involves this military regime in which everybody else has a role to play. If you're going to give someone a role, have the grace to tell them you've given them the role. Don't silently give them the role. Barbara Taylor Bradford, she said 2 things of use in her long and illustrious life. One of them was, I shouldn't be rude about Barbara Taylor Bradford. Even if she may be here, I don't know. Who knows? She said, never go to sleep on an argument. Make peace before you go to bed. And the second one was never make silent demands. If you're going to make a demand, then take responsibility for verbalizing it. So sometimes if you're the organizer in your household, I won't ask you to put your hands up if you're the organizer in your household, but if you're the organizer in your household, you may well need to give other people tasks to do, because if you don't organize it, no one else will. And now this principle works if you're a manager in a business as well. It works if you're the chair of a committee. It works if you're the chair of a meeting. Works in all sorts of situations. What works really well is to have a regular group conscience with whoever the other people are in your setup, and divide up your tasks between you so that everybody knows who's responsible for what. And then you leave people to get on with it or not get on with it, and reconvene for the next group conscience to discuss how things have gone. So you give people, this is under concept 3, right of decision to carry out their duties as they see fit, and you have the discussion together. What doesn't work is if you're the supreme commander just handing out orders and leaving little post-it notes everywhere for things for people to do. That isn't usually effective unless you have a very docile husband. Another tip, sometimes you need to ask people to do something, and it needs to have the force of this needs to be done. Sometimes it's a request. I reserve the requests for the things that don't matter so much. If it's mission critical, then it's got to be understood by the person that I'm delegating it to that this absolutely must be done. A couple of points. A friend of mine talks about an American military commander who worked at the headquarters of the American Armed Services in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And as you can imagine, things were a little busy at the headquarters of the American Armed Forces in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And he had 3 in trays. Now, I forget the exact headings on the in trays, but they were something like this: necessary. That was what needed to be done. Second in tray, absolutely necessary. So it's the next stage up from necessary. And the third one was absolutely vital, which was an even higher degree of urgency. The one Al-Anon fault is to have everything in the universe in one of these 3 categories. And I'm still learning now. There are all sorts of things that I have spent my life thinking are mission critical, and they're not even necessary. So I've got 2 boxes of herbs and spices, and one of the boxes is herbs and spices A to F. And the second box is herbs and spices G to Z. And if you would have asked me a year ago, okay, getting the right herbs and spices in the right boxes, where is that on the scale? Necessary, absolutely necessary, or mission critical? It was mission critical if you looked at me responding to finding the turmeric in the A to F. Who would put the turmeric in the A to... I mean, it's not even near A to F. Garam masala, maybe that, I could understand that. If you're going to pick one to put in the other box, you at least pick a G or an H, not a T. It makes no sense. I've discovered it's not even necessary. So with the plans for the day, to go light, and if you find yourself with nothing to do, I mean, most of you, if you're like me, I haven't been in a position with nothing to do since around 1982. So, this is maybe, in the long grass. But maybe try this for a while. Try just crossing as many things as possible off the to-do list, and just leave it with 2 or 3 things and do those properly. Our cleaner hasn't been coming since the situation started. And so we've had to do such things as change the bedclothes. And the cleaner would change the bedclothes once a week. On a Monday morning, bedclothes changed, new duvet cover, 7 pillows changed, sheets changed, everything all, beautiful. Like a hotel. And it says on page 133, we avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery. And the way I deliberately manufacture misery is I manufacture endless things to do so that I can feel that I'm accomplishing something, and it's activity, it's not action. And I can't tell you the difficulty I had when I had a very busy Monday, like 1 week into the cleaner not being there, and I didn't change the bedclothes. I left the bedclothes for 2 weeks. But it freed up 20 minutes. So maybe the job is to do less and to seek more guidance from the higher power about what really needs to be done. A friend of mine says, if you can mow the lawn and do the laundry on the same day, you get the mental health award. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I've learned to sweep 1/4 of a floor. Sometimes I can't face sweeping the whole floor or mopping a whole floor or sweeping. I've got a complicated room where you can't really get a hoover. There are too many corners you can't get a hoover in, so we have to use a brush and a pan. And I've learned it's okay just to sweep 1/4 of that room, to dust one shelf. Because I will be someone who, if I can't dust the whole room, I won't dust any of the room. And I walk around the whole time feeling guilty. Oh, look at the dust, look at the dust, look at the dust. Waiting for this magical time when there's literally nothing else to do. Like that ever happens. Linda Bazantz talks about paying half a bill. So if you can't pay the whole bill, maybe pay half the bill. So plans for the day. One question from earlier. When do you apologise? Promptly. When we were wrong, promptly admitted it. If I need to apologise, I knock over chairs to get to the person to apologise. I don't want stuff hanging around. I don't care if it's elegant. I don't care if it's timely. If I need to apologise, I just do it. It takes 15 seconds. It's embarrassing. It's done. Good. The sky has never fallen from a swift apology. And I've never heard anyone say, oh, I wish they'd taken longer to apologise. Now, amends, that's a different thing. There are people who make amends too quickly, but that's an entirely different matter. When someone is not in a position to analyse the relationship clearly and just wants to fix it. But an apology, I've never heard it, I mean, maybe it happens, but I've never heard anyone complain of an apology being made too quickly. Someone asking, how important is it to write the list as opposed to keeping it in your head? I think that's a matter on which reasonable people of goodwill disagree. I write things down so that I don't have to keep anything in my head, because my head is full enough of rubbish as it is without having to mentally keep lists. I can't even imagine how to live like that. I write stuff down. Any other questions on this little passage? I'm just going to... Actually, we haven't really fully covered the passage. I'm just going to tell you which bit I think we've covered. Okay, so we've covered this bit I'm highlighting. It will highlight in a moment. So on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. Any questions about that? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Tim?
Yeah?
It's O'Share.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm O'Share. I have a question.
Yeah.
Good morning. About, we consider our plans for the day, so one of the Al-Anon tendencies that I have is being too rigid with the plans that I have for the day. And you talked a little bit about it with crossing things off, but how do we work with considering our plans for the day and also turning our life over to God in step 3?
Okay, that's a really good question. Again, this is one of those things where you have to know where you are on the spectrum between the addict and the alcoholic. My experience with people with addicts, that with a lot of people, unless they schedule things at specific times, literally nothing will get done. So they have to have fixed schedules. You might be married to one, between you and me, lazy, disorganized. The solution to that is to have a schedule. Don't tell anyone I said that. If you're at the other extreme, the plans can become a straitjacket and a way of keeping God out. So what I do is I've got lists of lists and lists of potential things to do on any particular day, and lists of things which are coming up. I've got quite a very, very complicated life. There's a lot of moving parts, so I've got everything super organized. But I use software on a phone to do this, and on my computer it syncs between the phone and the computer. But I've got a folder which is called Today. And I pull tasks from different lists into the Today folder. And at the moment, my Today folder has got, how many has it got? It's got 11 things that need to be done today. Most of those are fairly short. Some have already been done. So I pull that list together. And this is where God comes in. I mean, some things have to be scheduled in my diary for a specific time. Where I am in my recovery at the moment, I only schedule things which must be scheduled. If it needn't be scheduled, it's not going to be scheduled. So just looking at my diary over the next 7 days, the only things actually scheduled are daily meetings, so online appointments for various types of meeting. Everything else is unscheduled, but there's going to be a lot that gets done. I used to schedule phone calls with sponsees, and I don't anymore because it doesn't need to be scheduled, in my experience. I mean, it depends on how your life is structured. There are different ways of doing that. One compromise for people who have only limited time available, and this is an absolute genius idea. It's from what's his name? Mickey M. from up in the mountains above Denver, one of the Fellowship of the Spirit people. His sponsee time every day is between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And he's got a lot of sponsees. And it's first come, first serve. The phone turns on at 4 o'clock. The first person that calls, he picks up the phone. If you don't get through, you'll have to try your luck later. And he doesn't return calls, none of that. That's the time I'm available. If it's engaged, it's engaged. When I'm done with that person, the phone goes back on the hook and I wait for the next call. It's brilliant. If you work with more than one or two sponsees and you try and schedule all the calls, you spend more time scheduling calls and rescheduling calls than you do actually on the phone to them. And most people I found are pretty unreliable about sticking to scheduled times anyway, so it's not even worth bothering. Once I've got my list for the day, what I'm currently doing is I pick the next most urgent thing off the list and do that. Or if it's something which takes 5 hours, maybe do the first half hour of it. Let's say it's a work day. I've got a project which is going to take 5 hours. Rather than saying I have to do all 5 hours now, how about do 1 hour or do half an hour and then say to God, what next? And so if I do that, the day just falls out naturally. I don't need to be over controlling. As long as I'm diligent enough to get the tasks which are mission critical onto the list, and I use God to do that, to say what absolutely has to be done today. I can let God guide me all through the day about what action to take next. And I lose a lot of efficiency in my life by trying to force myself to do things that my mind and body and whatever else are not attuned to. So sometimes if I get too rigid with schedules, what I find is that, let's say my ego mind says you need to work for 4 hours now, and my mind is just not there, the work I do will be terrible. It will take twice as long to get the same result, or maybe not as good a result. So I've got to let God in to help me guide what I do and when. Does anyone else have any other questions on those 3 or 4 lines? Good. So I'm going to flip to the... Oh, yes, sorry, Rivka.
It wasn't a question, it's a comment, but can you guys hear me better with my new headset? Yeah? Okay. One thing that helps me, and I think I read this somewhere, if I'm not wrong, it was from the 7 Habits of the Highly Effective whatever, is to do the hard thing first. So if I look at my list, there's usually one thing that I don't want to do, that I'm resisting, that it seems difficult to me. If I do that, then I feel so good about myself, then whatever I do after that, it's like icing on the cake. So that's my tip.
Yeah, so I hope everyone caught that. I mean, we're playing tricks with our own psychology sometimes, but that is necessary. So that's one tool that I often use, is get the thing that I dread out of the way first, and then I feel satisfied. What I say to sponsees who are doing step work is do your step work, your daily step work, first thing in the morning. Before, get up earlier than anyone else, do half an hour's step work, and then you can spend all day having done the step work. If you leave it till 11 o'clock at night, you spend all day not having done your step work for that day. So to do the worst thing first. Another trick as well, which is useful if you're getting panicky. If you've got 15 tasks and 10 of them take 5 minutes, do the 10 that take 5 minutes, and then you cleared 2/3 of your tasks in, half an hour, 45 minutes, and that can relieve a lot of tension. So those are just they're not really program tips, they're just practical tips. So the next line, under these conditions we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Couple of points about placing your thought life on a higher plane. Formal prayer and meditation really helps with placing my thought life on a higher plane. Motivations are certainly important. The difficulty with your motivations, if you're an Al-Anon, is that you can be motivated by wanting to get a good result, except that involves too much control of other people around you. So what I have to be careful about, I mean, I've already spoken about this today, but to make sure that my motivation is to do God's will, not to enact my virtuous plan. I think one of the dangers, and I think this is an Al-Anon issue as opposed to an alcoholic issue, is that I will seek God's will for me. Let's say it's with running the household or running my business or to do with my home group in AA. I will seek God's guidance. I'll think through principles of how I'm supposed to live. And then I take God's plan and turn it into my plan and start to pursue it like I'm a petty dictator, and be trapped by this plan, which is full of good, virtuous things. But it's no longer God's plan, it's now my plan. And self-will can actually be simply God's will, which I feel possessive about. And I think this is very much an Al-Anon problem as opposed to an alcoholic problem. So it's not that the motives are necessarily wrong, it's the attachment to them which becomes the problem. Regarding employing our mental faculties with assurance, there's some difficulty here as well. My natural assumption in any situation is that I'm right, and I need to run a lot of things past other people. If I feel tense or awkward or scared about a decision I've made, I absolutely need to run it past someone else. If there is anything but love involved in making the decision, if there's any fear there, if there's any tension, any of that, I need to run it past someone else. So yes, it's true, I need to be able to think things through, but that doesn't mean I can automatically trust what is coming to me from the higher power. Any questions about those points there? In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here, we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. An important principle I've been shown in making decisions is that I can choose only between the available options. I'm going to tell this story and adjust the situation slightly in order to preserve anonymity. Someone agreed to invite his father round for dinner. And his father would have a tendency to extract lots of information about my friend's life and then criticise his decisions and try to redirect him in 1,000 small ways. So that was the pattern. And the available options there of situations to face are either option number 1, don't invite your father round. Option number 2, invite your father round and accept that he may try his usual tricks. He may not, he may be different that day, but the chances are he will do all of the things that he usually does. Having him come round and be a different person and be placid and accepting and encouraging and supportive, that's not one of the available options. So don't bank on that. I've got to face reality as it is. There's a line in the big book later on about having an ideal about how our husbands ought to be. I think it's into wives, or maybe it's the family afterward. Hoping that this person is going to live up to them. And it's a common phenomenon. I've done it. Friends of mine have done it. Is to be in a relationship with someone and to think this would be a perfect person once I have whipped them into shape and brought them up to my standards. And you're tense until you've done that. In making any decision, I can only choose between the options that are available in reality. I've kept sponsees on for too long where there is some kind of weirdness or tension or aggression in the relationship, where I wasn't facing the fact that there are two options: terminate the relationship or continue the relationship given the person's personality. There was always this mystery third option that maybe I can stay in the relationship and change how they're behaving. And that's not a real option. Once I'm down to the actual options which are available, decisions become a lot easier. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or a decision. I discussed this in an earlier session. The three levels are spirit, mind, and body. So the decision is always at a practical level. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. And again, this is a very straightforward thing to do. This is really, you can, if you want to work with this, we relax and take it easy, is whatever techniques you can adopt. This isn't really the forum to explain those, but practices which enable relaxation techniques. So, if you do yoga, this is the point at which Buddhist meditation may help. Eastern meditation, Taoist meditation, things which are about calming the mind. There are lots of apps available these days, like Insight Timer and so on, and Headspace. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. And my experience very commonly is when I'm agitated, I shouldn't respond. I shouldn't because if I respond, it will be a reaction. It won't be a response. And so often I've got into complex discussions with sponsees where if I'd left it another 6 hours and then said, right, God, how do I respond? The perfect line comes to me which just puts the whole topic to bed. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we've tried this for a while. So it's only in a relaxed state. The fear blocks me from seeing what the right thing to do is. And I'm going to whiz through the next paragraph. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we will find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. And I think I've already covered this in large part. Check things against principle. Check things against the literature, check things against the traditions, check things against the concepts, check things against your experience, phone other people, pray and meditate. That combination won't guarantee that everything is right, but this is an injunction against shooting from the hips, against simply acting on the basis of something that's come into my head. Someone's asked, what is the difference between inspiration and intuition? Sometimes I get this is very, very subjective, and it's simply how things appear to me right now. Inspiration is... So it talks earlier about inspiration or intuitive thought. Sometimes it's just a feeling, and I think that's the inspiration, when an idea suddenly comes to me out of nowhere. An intuitive thought is where my understanding of a situation changes and suddenly the solution becomes apparent because so something has happened at an intellectual level. So I think one can talk about gut level and an intellectual level. To me, that's the difference between the two. Although I don't fuss myself too much about the distinction. The fact is, the more I practice this, the more I discover solutions coming to me in various ways. I'm going to stop shortly. Does anyone have any other questions about those passages from today? In which case, Sarah Rivka, would you like to take us out with the Serenity Prayer?
I'd love to. Okay, everybody unmute yourself if you want to.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you. See you next weekend or earlier, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good day.